What are seen some optimism?
Yeah, transport mobility, and which is heavily dependent on the stringency of the lockdown. So last year we saw transport mobility in the Philippines relatively low, and that's because we had a stringent lockdown. The start of the year, we continue with the GCQ, and but in terms of the mobility, say people mobility trends in public transport systems, it's still not as high compared to other countries. I think below 50% of pre-pandemic level. And that is, I think, one key criterion for investors in looking at whether, as a gauge or barometer for economic activity. There's of course a positive correlation between the mobility and the economic activity or economic growth. Another, of course, is the vaccine rollout. So we already initiated it. Relatively, we are, of course, not as fast compared, say, to the United States, and that's because again there's a global vaccine shortage. The distribution of vaccine globally is heavily skewed towards advanced economies, and it takes a while before we can have more of the supply share. But of course, the government's plan is that by the second half, there will be an acceleration in the vaccine rollout. And that can also be considered uh, by the with investors more positively. And another, of course, is inflation. If we look at inflation differential between the Philippines vis-a-vis the other countries, we tend to have a relatively high inflation, and that's because again, there's one output there, and that's meat inflation, which is the biggest contributor, and that is what the government is addressing. So it has already imposed certain emergency measures, executive orders that will increase the pork importation, reduce pork tariffs, so that the supply shortage will be addressed, and therefore inflation will come back to normal levels. So I think that's among the tailwinds at the start of the year. But in the second half, it appears that once these are resolved, then we can have a more optimistic and better economic picture.